Considering that it's a small world now, when any gruesome crimes happen anywhere on our planet Earth, and by a human being's hand, the entire society's heart breaks and the world's faith is shaken. And the upcoming cases are not exactly about horrific crimes you've never heard of, that much, but rather to be aware of the extent to which Homo sapiens can go. If you feel chills running down your spine by the end of this video, then like, share, and subscribe to Top 10 Binge. Number 1. Catherine Knight. She became the first woman in Australian history to receive a life sentence without the possibility of release. Knight murdered John Price, the man she was in a relationship with. After living together for years, during which she frequently used violence against him, Price kicked out Knight from his home. She went back to Price's house the evening of February 29, 2000, and repeatedly stabbed him before committing and plotting furthermore. Knight was found unconscious inside the home by police, who had been called by Price's neighbor and coworker. Knight was then taken into custody. Number 2. John George Hay. Between 1944 and 1949, he was known as the acid bath murderer. Hay started his criminal career by using a funny name to sell counterfeit stocks, discovered and received prison sentences for his fraud several times. In 1943, Hay was released from prison and began killing affluent people for their money. He dissolved the bodies in sulfuric acid. This method allowed Hay to kill 5 people without being discovered. In the 6th one, despite Hay's plea of not guilty by reason of insanity during his trial, he was found guilty and hanged. Number 3. Cleveland Torso Murders. In Cleveland, Ohio, during the 1930s, a serial killer terrorized the city by killing and decapitating at least 12 victims over the course of 4 years. Bodies were found around the city, and the majority of them had been beheaded. Edward Andrassy and Florence Palillo were the only ones positively identified. Never verified, Rose Wallace might be the 3rd victim. 2 suspects were identified during the greatest murder investigation in Cleveland history, but no charges were ultimately brought. The torso murderer's identity remains a mystery. Number 4. Moninder Singh Pandar and Surinder Kohli. The finding of dead children's and adults' bodies at Moninder Singh Pandar's home in Noida's Nithari hamlet stunned the world. During the course of the investigation, it was found that Surinder Kohli, Pandar's servant, raped and killed women, occasionally minors, and had even eaten their body parts in one instance. Pandar remains to be a co-defendant in some cases out of the 15. The Allahabad High Court turned his death sentence to life imprisonment when Kohli was found guilty in 5 of them. Number 5. Robert Hansen. A quiet, reclusive child, Hansen loved to hunt while growing up in Iowa. He moved to Anchorage, Alaska, where he settled with his family after serving many jail terms for misdemeanor larceny. While there, Hansen started kidnapping and molesting young ladies while holding them at gunpoint. Some of them were flown into the wilderness by him in his private plane, where he hunted them like prey before killing them. Hansen killed at least 17 women in all. In 1983, authorities finally turned successful in putting him behind bars. In 2014, he died from natural causes. Number 6. Gertrude Baniszewski. Police discovered the body of 16-year-old Likens, who had suffered more than 150 burns and slashes, lying on a filthy mattress in 1965. The young girl was initially reduced to nothing more than skin and bone, making it obvious that she had starved to death. She had suffered from hunger and a brain hemorrhage. Gertrude Baniszewski, a mother of 7, was detained and accused with first-degree murder. Likens' parents paid Baniszewski $20 each week for the care of Likens and Jenny. Instead, Baniszewski stood by while Likens was beaten and made to eat feces by her own children. Number 7. Lawrence Bidaker and Roy Norris. Vile serial killer pair killed 5 girls. The victims, who ranged in age from 13 to 18, were abducted on Southern California freeways over a 5-month period in 1979. They were subjected to the worst type of physical anguish by the murderers, who used an ice pick, screwdriver, vice grips, and pliers. The screams of their victims were also captured on tape. The Evans dogged the former deputy district attorney for Los Angeles County, who prosecuted the murderers for years after the trial. They were known as the Toolbox Killers and spent years in prison on death row. Number 8. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum Heist. On March 18, 1990, at 1:24 a.m., security personnel at Boston, Massachusetts Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum buzzed in 2 men who seemed to be police officers. Once inside, the attackers took down the security officers and began one of the biggest museum robberies in history. The thieves took 13 works of art totaling more than $500 million within an hour, leaving empty frames hanging in their wake. The FBI rushed into the case right away, but they were unable to complete their investigation because there was no physical evidence at the crime scene. Although the heist is still unsolved, a well-liked belief holds that the Boston Mafia was behind it. Number 9. Issei Sagawa. He was born to a wealthy family but always had the urge for human flesh. At 23, Sagawa entered the apartment of a tall German woman living in Tokyo and attacked a woman, raping her. Police didn't realize he was actually attempting to eat her, even though he bit off a piece of her flesh. He later told Vice he was obsessed with taller Western women. At 32, he went to study literature in France. Receiving a PhD, he made friends with a 25-year-old Dutch woman, Renée Hartevelt. In 1981, he invited her under the guise of working on a poetry assignment, but ended up shooting her in the neck and eating various parts of her body over a 2-day span. He attempted to dump the leftovers of her body in a lake nearby, but was caught in the act. He was held in police custody for 2 years before being deemed legally insane and deported back to Japan. Once in Japan, he was declared sane by psychologists and signed himself out of the mental institution where he was being held. Number 10. Dorothy Jane Scott disappearance. A 32-year-old California single mother who worked as a retail shop secretary in 1980 vanished without a trace. Scott had received numerous calls in the months prior to the incident from an unidentified man who professed his love for her while also threatening to kill her. On May 28, Scott was allegedly the victim of such threats when she was kidnapped in her own vehicle after taking a coworker to the hospital. Later, her automobile was left in an alley and set on fire. The next day, it was discovered there. However, Scott didn't turn up until her burned remains were found by a construction worker 4 years after she went missing. No doubt, some people hope for Armageddon while others cry out for salvation. But here we are, commenting together and calling out for more peace and love, right? If you found this binge list informative, then do like, share, and subscribe to Top 10 Binge for more.